Hello, hello, hello. Can you hear me back there? How's this sound? Good? I think we're just going to get started in a little bit, if that's okay with everyone. So maybe come and find a seat. If you need a seat and we don't have a seat, we can probably get you a chair. Yeah, we're testing a speaker. Is that better, people? We were getting a buzz. Okay. Can you still hear me? Can we work with this? Yeah, we're getting a buzz from this one too. I think if people are okay, I think we'll work with it. If it's doable, okay. Thanks for bearing with us, everybody. We're pulling in the experts. How about now? Do you still get mic? I'm not really getting mic. I'm trying with the mic, but it doesn't really sound like there's much in the mic. With mic. Oh, there's mic. Oh, no. Oh. Hello, hello. Hello, hello. I'm just going to... Oh, there's Mike. Okay. I'm going to keep talking while we're doing this. Did you enjoy this Poetry Center video? Thank you, Steve. That was David Melnick reading Menenayida. It was from 1984. It was 84, right, Steve? Or Steve? Around. That was Menenayida book 2, I believe. Poetry Center's been putting up some really incredible archival videos on their YouTube. I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't seen them already. It feels like there are some fresh drops, maybe like once a week or something. Big apologies for the buzzing. We're gonna try to do like minimal buzz with mic. Find a sweet spot there. That's pretty, oh, but then, yeah? How about, that's on? There's the mic there. How is that buzz, people? A tolerable buzz? All right. May you all... I wish you all tolerable buzzes going forward. Okay, I'm going to get started if people are ready for that. Thank you so much for joining us. This is remarkably exciting to celebrate this fantastic collected of David Melnick's called Nice, which we have in the back. And we're honored to have one of the editors, Ben Friedlander, here. Ben's work has been, yes! At Small Press Traffic, we've become very intimate with Ben's work as an editor, going through our archive. We're really excited by our collection of Jimmy and Lucy's House of K that Ben did with Andrew Schelling, which is one of my favorite magazines. So delighted to have you here, delighted to celebrate this book, and thank you for sharing this with us. Okay, I'm Noah. I'm here, honored to be here on behalf of Small Press Traffic, who, along with the Poetry Center and Nightboat Books, bring you this evening. Thank you, Sid Steide, Steve Dickinson, Stephen Motika, and everyone at Nightboat. And thank you to our three phenomenal presenters. We are celebrating the release of Nice. We have these three poetry thinkers who bring really fascinating different connections to Melnick's work. We have Benjamin Friedlander, who has long been a shepherd of Melnick in his difficult-to-find work. We have Gordon Faylor, who did the only interview with David Melnick in existence through SF MoMA's Open Space. And we have Jo Giardini visiting us from Baltimore, whose work on queer and trans archives lends an especially valuable framework for thinking through Melnick's work and legacies. I don't know how familiar you are with David Melnick. I think of him as a poet's poet, and maybe even a poet's poet, if that exists. A poet's poet, maybe? How far does it go? David Melnick wrote 4 mind-bending books and left writing. He was a bizarre kind of San Francisco icon to me, a queer poet of the Bay who did entirely his own thing and has been beloved and championed by a constant, but perhaps small, stream of weirdos and experimental writing fiends. His work is unlike any work I've come across, though there are resonances in particular lineages. Say maybe the homophonic translations of Zhukovsky, a clear classical humanities education, what later became conceptual writing, a certain bent of language poetry. I won't say much more than that, and I have a feeling you'll see what I mean shortly. But if you are curious, I can't recommend enough Ben's fantastic introduction to this work. So without further ado, I'm going to pass this off to our 3 presenters, who are going to be in this order. We'll start with Ben Friedlander, then we'll have Jo Giardini, and we'll end with Gordon Faylor. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a nice evening.
Is this a good distance from the mic? This is good? Okay. Thank you, Steve Dickinson, for arranging for this event to happen. And thank you, Noah. You should be part of this presentation, not just introducing it, because you're also part of this book. You wrote a beautiful preface for it. I just have a couple of things that I wanted to say in celebration of David Melnick. I know there are several people here who knew David, some who knew him better than I did. I was lucky to spend a little time with him. Today is the anniversary of his death 2 years ago. Tomorrow will be his birthday, would have been his 86th birthday, so it's really nice to be able to have this celebration today. It is difficult to talk about David's work and life as a whole for a lot of obvious reasons with his life. David was humble to a fault, destroyed work that he had written when it wasn't up to the level that he believed it should be. He did not talk himself up. At one time, he invited me to interview him and then also offered to transcribe the tape and destroy the tape. I realized that he wanted to tell me his story, but he didn't necessarily want it to actually be told. And I think, in retrospect, that was very typical of David. I'm going to read a brief excerpt from a letter to one of his early friends in poetry, which is John Taggart, which, when I discovered it, seemed unlikely to me. But they met in graduate school at the University of Chicago and maintained a correspondence for several years. And those letters, which are in the archive at San Diego, give a great, great portrait of what David's life was like from the mid-'60s into the early '70s, which is at the time when he was transitioning from thinking of himself as having an academic career to becoming a poet. he was writing poetry during that time, but I think he fully committed to it around 1968. Telling David's life is too complicated for this short space, but a couple of coordinates of it that I think are useful. He was a prodigy in music, playing the violin. He went to Interlaken, and he was the first violinist there. And he wanted to study mathematics, and I think the mathematical perspective really influences his understanding of language. He began studying mathematics at the University of Chicago, fell in love with Shakespeare, and then dropped out, went to Berkeley to continue his studies, went back to the University of Chicago for a master's degree, went to Berkeley for a PhD. He was going to write about Shakespeare and pastoral, and then about Shakespeare and modernist poets, became disenchanted with academia, easy to do, taught his last class before quitting with glitter in his beard and wearing high heels. And that same year, he made the friendship of David Green, who had founded the Gay Artists and Writers Collective with a K, so it spells gawk, moved to San Francisco, soon after met the love of his life, Davy Doyle, and the rest is forgotten history. I'll read one paragraph from the introduction, which at least gives the shape of the books that he wrote, which I think he curated his work so carefully that it does give a more coherent picture than the other facts of his life do. But I'll do this just to situate then what I'm going to say about the first book, Eclogues. I think I have enough light here. Melnick's poetry yields a story, a compact one. 4 books comprise his legacy. Eclogues, written 1967 to 1970, Pecoet, mostly 1972, Men in Aida, 1983, and A Pin's Fee, 1987. As the dates of composition show, his years of creativity span a crucial 2 decades in the rise of queer community. His first book, begun before Stonewall, his last written in the crisis years of AIDS. And each book reflects a truth of its moment, though in a manner entirely its own. In Eclogues, the beautiful facade of coded language preserves an experience it screens from view. Pecoet yields to the joy of invention, creating a language all its own. Men in Aida, the pinnacle of this span, is his epic, an act of gay world-building, embracing the past and transforming it through homophonic translation. A Pin's Fee, the shortest of the 4, is anguished, its last word, death, repeating 45 times. After this, nothing. For the rest of Melnick's life, another 35 years, no other poetry would surface. When David was writing Eclogues, he said this in a letter to John Taggart, which is very typical of the way in which he would denigrate his poetry, even in the act of offering it. Yes, I'm troubled as you are by the imagey and T.S. Eliot, Ezra Poundish character of my poetry. The piece you saw was one of a sequence called Eclogues, which I think I mentioned to you in an old letter. The third of 10 in order of writing. I'd like to say that I improved as I went along, but a number of the old snapshots appear also in the later poems. I'm hoping the 10 parts together will be seen as a prise de position, even if there is little statement of the kind you show the value of in your work. The whole sequence will be printed this winter as a book by the same publishers through a friend, David McAlevey, who did Ron Silliman's Crow, which he's no doubt sent you. All 10 poems are from 1968 to 70. For about a year, 70 to 71, I was writing very short divertissements without interest. I was studying for later recuperating from my exams. A few of these will appear in Ron's titles. And that third poem of Eclogues that he mentions is, I'll read this one just to get a little bit of the sound of this work out. It's also the poem, it contains the phrase that Noah took for the title of his preface. It's called These Are the Aspects of the Perfect. These are the aspects of the perfect. Wave, drop, decide, stone. Sexerata. Air and welly. The silver, price on the in, the continent. These are the aspects. Bed, bean aid, the old nation hit, ting frost of, pin painting. I fought the wicked men to overcome them. I have fought to overcome the wicked. The clash, premature, other, is everywhere, king and various, whose mouth surrounds a special light. At each prick, quietly, the welt. Inspires the form, the house of the praised accused. Exit, lectures. Poets exist, shield of Achilles. The praised accused leaves a sailor, landed, his spear, the perfect. Stem, whose leaves are all experience in time. The sailor twice restrains a doe from drowning. Once, in a draught of her own fawn's blood, of the blood of her. What heart, cut and sparkling, fails in answer to distinguish and dies of? And once, in the pool of dusty question, Fresno, poets exist, trained to announce. So that was David's first book. And I just want to end with a brief anecdote of Men and Aida, which I think the other participants are going to be talking about in greater detail. But it is a book, it grew out of a reading group that Robert Duncan had organized of reading the Iliad in Greek. And David began to do homophonic translations of the poem line by line, meaning he would find English words that matched the Greek words, the sound of the Greek words, exactly as possible. I saw the notebook that he was doing this in. He would take each line by itself as a separate poem and do his English words sort of spread down the page, so that I suppose there might have been a version of Men and Aida in which every line was its own poem on a page. But in fact, he printed it looking exactly like the text of the Iliad does, if you look in the Loeb Classics, for instance, which was the version that David worked from. Shortly after the book was published, Allen Ginsberg gave a lecture on poetics on the Berkeley campus, a very crowded room. And Ginsberg was talking about Ezra Pound's distinction of poetry into melopoeia, phanopoeia, and logopoeia, the poetry of music, the poetry of image, and the poetry of intellect. And as his example of melopoeia, he wanted to give the opening of Homer's Iliad, but he couldn't remember exactly how the Greek goes. And so he called out, someone must know, how does it start? And Stephen Rotifer, bless his soul, being very Stephen Rotifer-like, shouted out from the back of the room, Men and Aida, they appeal, eh? And it was so perfectly cued to the Greek that Ginsberg said, yes, that's it, and repeated it, saying it in Greek, and then going on and saying the first 3 or 4 lines, which I thought was a beautiful endorsement that the music of the Iliad is in Men and Aida, as well as so many other things that David added to it. So I just wanted to read one short piece from the last book. It's a favorite part for me because it includes the name of my friend and at that time companion, Pat Reed, who, fortunately for poetry, her name is very much fits the Greek word patriades, which appears often in the Iliad. I thought for a long time that she might be the only person in the poem that has both her first and last name. There are a couple of other first name, last name figures in here. I don't know if they're people that David knew or just names summoned by the Greek. But in any case, this is a little piece of it. Dun thick turn knee kiss, and he don't ask Greece epicene? These spar read, those arrest, ye? Name a Nessie pair up bev ta. Ethel fellas saganus, Tim, men nay. Aga must topple lest they kick it. A bully mean kickin' Polly, care thee onion. You toe-loving dame in neck ape, up seein' alone. He poo kung hollow, o seek carrycomb, o own test, come, won't to a hay? Fondest are wrist tea, a promo anemone eunuch cock alone. Either say Paul Lucas TV a phrase sin nude that tease alky, Edie owes, they own in pond, o poor re in a sea. Punt on a pip low sauce, set a rosary ear as I ye raz. Meek these a loath, happy see ye neck, heavy they a knee, yes. Ex happy ease yea, ease neon nan throwin, meet own. Pat Reed is some mega peephole mop, eat a bandita thee mo. These men is sin men, harm mock at ye fiend, thus ye oft do. Ook, on thee meanie, Oz sorry ye feel on men allowin'. Knee ease he you, photos say he's taller in a parakeet teen. Who candy craze, Mickey the wrist at tether, rough road it is. Ear tickle meat, toad aid these so ten can knee ye see me ye, ease. Allah, ma, lot row aesthete thee, Mona see take a knee thee. Lion honest so he tone a cock, onin, o sigh you, gaz. Thank you.
Hi, is this sounding good? Thank you. Closer? How's this? Perfect. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here with you all and to celebrate this phenomenal book. And I'm so grateful for Ben for his role in shepherding it into the world. I've gone back and forth on all sorts of things that I want to speak to or say tonight, just because I really think it's an unbelievably rich text, both in what it represents of Melnick's work and also in the way that the intervention poses, I think, the way that the introduction poses, I think, a lasting intervention into the ways that we might want to narrate some of the poetics of the 70s and 80s. And the way that those have often been historicized to separate the queer from the avant-garde, the political from the sexual, and different geographic domains, both local to San Francisco and within wider global contexts. I wanted to start with reading a few passages from Men in Aida as well, so I'm going to pick up not exactly where Ben left off, but with a couple sections from Book 2 and then the final section from Book 3. Alloy, men, rot the eye, take Guy and Harry's hippo core rust tie. You don't panic. He ID'd Duke an Adam up, hope noose. A low gay murmur is a cat tap, prayin' on a hose sockle leia. Timmy say, oh les see de polyosophy, noosin a guy own. Hey daddy, yoik, got tattoo, moan, a wrist tap, high net taboo, lay pimps I ape. Pat, Ray, a day a gam, known, you loan a nay, Ron. Guy, I'm in phony sauce, epay apt air went up, prose suit a basket. You lay on air, it was up, penny as a guy on Eltonesque lease sea, in Agamemnon. us a triad dow. Panda mallet wreck you, sag or you aim in a pity low. To wreck cycle you carry, come, own, toss, a guy use. Pawns you'd yen hung arcane, hello ye pole in your you agree on. Trojan new Gary. Tom Fizzle, loom p a dome at a countess. Old Hannah type Rosen tie a penny amp singer upon toss. Hey, Ray, lie some men 8 Trojans. See decade day a fey ape tie. And a little later in book 2. Hey you, tip poor Aida, lone ape P, gay flay asp, bet on who laying Uriel's sink roof face. He caught, tended, a fine net, oh yow, gay. Host own air, come on and own a poke all couth, his special hojo. Ike lay palm fan, no sa, dia aether us? Oh, Ron on knee, K. Toned host or knee tone, petty ye known, net nay Apollo, Cain, knowing egg, Aaron. On a kook known, do lick ode, dare rowing, Asia in lemony, Caestreus, Amphir ray 8 ra. In tacky and taboo, toned I a gallow men, apt to rue kissy, claw gay dawn, procat, the Stantons ma rock gay dept to lemon. Host own net, nay Apollo knee on a poke, Ike lease see, I own. Asp Eddie own pro gay on toes, Commander Ian. Oat 8 who poke tone, smeared, all Leon can nab is to poe, do now tone take I hip bone, a standing lemony Scamander's anthem went T. Maury, I hose a tip full of guy, and Thea. Gignet, I, hooray. And then the final section of book 3. Teen, the Paris myth, these seen, amive, omnious prose say pay, mine ye nail, appeasing on need they seethe, theme moan a neap day. Keenan, Ming are Menelaus, and Nicky Ensign, Athene, Keening, the off tease say, go pa, regard, they easy came in. Ally, thee feel low teat tit rap you men of knee, then day. Oog, are Pope aught tame? Moth they arose fraying us some fecal leaps in? Ooh, thought to sip proton, lack o' them monosex seratinis. Ape lay our poxes in pond to pour easy in a yes sea. Knee so think. Ron nigh Emmy yin feel, loti tick gay of knee. O say own aen aram me gay meg leak kiss seem eros airy. Era gay are hell. Lay host thick, he own a mod thee, pet tacky tease, tome men are entreaties, sea caught Evan, ass then lay hay as sin. Ought ray yield these, the no meal lona feet, a theory acus, eep, way seek, 3 seeking Alex on throne, they oi, they a, all lose tea, the not out row, unk. Lead tone tape peak corone, thick sail licks on throne, tote a reef, feel low, men allow, human gar feel a titty, yek, if the known eat is a theto. Ease sewing gar's fin, pause sin up itch, that oaky ear ream melony. T.C. the quai met, ape pinnin, knocks on throne Agamemnon. Kick, Cleedum after west gay, the earth on knee, the peak hurry. Nicky mend, the feign net, airy feel lumen nail, ow. He missed the Aryan hell, Lenin kick team moth o mufti, ache, thought ticket team moan up in a teen, naming and teen aching. Eat tech gay? Yes'm. Many see May 10th throw pea, see pale eater. Oh, says Fatah, trade these. Ape peed thee, neighing alley, Achaeans. I wanted to spend a bit of time getting some of the words that Melnick was moving through into the room just to be able to speak to the power of the transformation that is affected in the Iliad. As I think is probably the case for a number of other people in this room, was certainly the case for a number of other people, many other people in the world, I spent a substantial chunk of the fall rereading the Iliad as Emily Wilson's new translation was launched into the world, and also as I was looking for poems that could think about the long history of war and loss. In Emily Wilson's introduction to her most recent translation, she's very upfront about the effects that the poem has on her in her reading of it, about the movement from wrath to grief, about the effects of loss and the effects of bodies. The closing of her introduction makes clear that the story of war is one that everyone already knows. She writes, "You already know the story. You will die. Everyone you love will also die. You will lose them forever. You will be sad and angry. You will weep. You will bargain. You will make demands. You will beg. You will pray. It will make no difference. Nothing you can do will bring them back. You know this. Your knowing changes nothing. This poem will make you understand this unfathomable truth again and again, as if for the very first time." One of the things that I see so powerfully in Men and Aida is a working through of this in a way that takes that story of death and loss and tries to think about it as a grounds for telling a very different story, one that's been submerged, one that's been lost, a story that is necessarily utopic about the recombination of bodies. Melnick's sense of language, in contrast to the panoptic portraits of loss in the Iliad, evokes plethora, seeing in the churn of text recombinant possibilities in a social texture which exceeds any one perspective. Reading the poem, I move in and out of knowing what sense the words evoke. I catch reference, I see array, and I lose track of narrative. Names reappear across dozens of pages. There's a density that's so intense that without reading it aloud, it feels like your eye slips. Against a narrative which is so forceful in the Homeric epic, we have instead something that delights in slipperiness, something that delights in submersion. The bubbling speech forms a bridge between the history of language-centered writing, which still needs a proper social historian, and that of mid-century queer culture, especially in its forms of radical gender experimentations. And I see evoked throughout the Men and Aida book something of the socially anarchic work of the Coquettes, another communal formation in San Francisco. I was last week teaching their early 70s film, Elevator Girls in Bondage, which similarly moves away from any kind of claim to conventional narrative into social upheaval at different moments, ending somewhat absurdly with iguana destroying the city of San Francisco in miniature. It's wonderful, highly recommended. But I, you know, it's the destruction of the city replayed as, you know, a form of queer joy. And it's a similar sort of work to what Melnick gives us through Men and Aida, a portrait of loss that might be re-narrated as an occasion to come together communally, instantiating a similar power to the Coquettes in the absurd powers of bodies in unlikely conjunctions. There's a way to read the force of sound, the stammering, the mishearing, the various forms of disarticulation and misapprehension which Men and Aida insists upon. There's a way of looking at that forces as well a rereading of Pocoet, an earlier book of Melnick's that has so often been read as an instantiation of a private language, something that's necessarily gnomic. I think in the way that Men and Aida insists that we rehear a social landscape, we can see a way to revisit Pocoet not as something singular, but rather as a vision of a kind of alternate historical linguistics, which might cobble together disparate lands and references. The alienation and excitement Picoet evokes is grounded less, for me, after spending time with Menaida, in its obscurity than in its alter worldliness, a worldliness from another place, removed and submerged, but suggesting society rather than privation. One can work to trace the reference of individual words in this somewhat impossible book, attend to possible invented linguistic histories, but one is continuously left with a sense of a world beyond, a space of benighted relations. And I think when I'm reading Picoet after this, of a moment in an essay that Melnick wrote on Zhukovsky's Bottom, his wild reading of Vision in Shakespeare, which is the only extant article from Melnick's abandoned dissertation. The article is called Out of Seeing, and Melnick quotes from Zhukovsky at the very end of it. "Don't suggest the plots. I'm listening to the words." And part of what I take to be Melnick's power in Menaida and in Picoet is moving beyond that binary, to suggest that in listening to the words, if you listen intensely enough, if you listen with force enough, you can see alternate plots beyond what the texts were already suggesting. Wilson, in her introduction to the Iliad, lingers on the importance of the homosocial, on the force of love between Patroclus and Achilles, which ultimately determines the form of the poem and the form of its final violences. The power of relation in Melnick's work requires a different sort of scrying. We don't have central figures which orient our reading. Rather, characters carry across the poem through repeated reference. They disappear, they emerge again, they appear singularly, as with Pat Reed, and they appear in ways that are impossible to determine whether they're the same. Ron, again and again and again, is one carried reference. They get lost in the contours of twisted, thorny speech and erotic plosives. The sexual world here is more expansive than that of Achilles' love, and all the more suggestive for it. Sorry, just going to skip over a little bit of what I had here. One of the things that I've been trying to turn to as I've been thinking about Melnick is the other work that was happening in the Gay Artists and Writers Collective that Ben spoke to. They published only one other full book by a fellow classically inspired writer, Harmodius in Exile, who was a dear friend of Melnick's and who took his name from a famous regicide in the ancient world. I've been able to only recently get a scan of that book, which has a level of sort of militancy and clarity, which is, feels entirely distinct from the often obscurity of Melnick's work, but I want to read one of those pieces aloud to get a sense of sort of the different spaces that Melnick saw himself in solidarity with beyond simply the language side of things, which he also adored, but which has more forcefully claimed him before Ben's intervention. So this is from the Poems of Harmodius in Exile, published by Gawk around the same time that they published Picoet. A revolutionary brother, a comrade in the struggle, side by side in the streets and in our lovemaking. An army of lovers cannot lose, strong in the face of oppression, gentle in the wee hours of the morning as we sleep, free and unchained to run together, we love as strongly as we fight. Their gas made you cry more than my fucking you. Your kisses brought me more joy than our making Cronkite news. You're giving me a better understanding of revolution and Ginsberg both. We and the thousands like us are the revolution. We live civil disobedience 24 hours, a day just throughout our love, comrades in the streets, brothers in the struggle. Melnick never gives us a force of address or a force of political vision in quite those explicit terms. But I want to suggest, and I certainly have taken from the work, rereading it in this new edition, that such power is there lingering in it, in the way that words are fractured and rewritten, and especially in the repeated invocation of apostrophe and ecstasy, the O that repeats throughout the poem, that introduces names, that interrupts lines, and that helps stitch words together that otherwise might not track the Greek in the homophonic vision that he was so attentive to. The poem insists on finding its reader, on invoking an address that is latent in the Homeric text, but which requires rewriting to emerge. Sorry, I got 4 hours of sleep last night. No, less. 2 hours of sleep last night. I woke up at 4 a.m. and I lost that sentence in the middle of it. But the point I want to make is just that for all the ways that Melnick's work in Meneniida avoids explicit address, it continues to summon apostrophe in its syllabic tracking of the Homeric Greek in order to suggest, I think, a vision of community which would work in excess of the kinds of violence that attend the army of lovers, which, is a Platonic reference originally for the impossible to defeat army, gets summoned by Harmodius in exile as a vision of queer community. But I think that part of the force of Melnick's vision is that to be lovers might mean stepping away from being an army. I'm going to end there. I have some things that I was thinking about saying about Apinsfee, his final book, but I'd rather save that for conversation afterwards. Grateful for you all.
We're setting up a slideshow. Thank you so much to Steve, Noah, Elise for putting all this together. Thank you to Sid for impending technical support. Okay. Hi, David. From Fits of Tribute a few years ago, weeks ago. Accept this concordance, stuck in my craw, well, dredged from proclivity and play. I generated a bunch of poems for you. I was compiling for you overwrought descriptors, eschewing script for printer paper, typed, suggested Arial or Times New Roman simplicity, generalizing beauty as like minimalist, heartbreaking minimalist, as viewed in a word processor, always in your honor though, in search of a beautifully written poem for David Melnick. An excerpt of one from the first output set, titled Depicted David Melnick. Sid, could you skip to the next slide? Thank you. Dedicated 2024. The here, the lear, the moist of our malts, line donna amnioniaba sling promian. For he at loud brat droscore toe sneeze bez beds we bilbiles cody bronies so envier a new loined he main all cosid dome to yul wibben do belial kelil onera The lasers are the best, the tekibir that la. Ins og me hala auto dal dis linealt. Il drill la livial angel, sal best ho lil blowing with Olson. I titled some after your own works just to see. Poet didn't take. Go figure. That's fallow territory for this kind of thing, no? Steady removal, rather than any trace of book or stanza or phrase, usually. Result of reflexivity. Depiction of a poem called Poet, as its title played into the very same distortions and liquidations of language I knew it could. Other titles, like eclogues, for instance, yielded the kind of text I sought. A couple of years ago, a long-standing boys' chat, coincidentally currently titled Unintelligible, I'm in, got into free AI tools, even getting into world building, feeding character names like Crazy Blade, Chain Man, Dr. Lukash in until they seemed to reach some kind of consistency by way of the bot beating them into its head. Off one delightful chat with the boys, it occurred to me that the occasional appearance of text in our output would always skew toward illegibility, or at least corrupted spelling. Upon revisiting this work again, I was struck by a harmony between the neologistic play of Poet and these festering little agglutinations of letters and words, various image generators spewed out. If you're offended, David, send a signal now. Id onkly und intulier brolt and he passes I this petalowalian. The ensealed lesen bonsch obt lot and binment a resier young eggs loose on condol hutablade blilo lick be had eater. We do still oval cot he ul blero contul nercol och her spite il das. We sweets T10 lent be doc utol of genus. Assist art bladel id on noob good goes all dilt ilts to nap lalura falk hot etir cond ong and hem heil chores say mellow demestle auna bit o movales autal he sees. The lay be ha the heck lord oi who at tep card since fours mahau wabor and undog on to bow pa tenses forial o cagriol o thornog court. Sloppy pathways over the hill to tributes so beautiful, containing future, play life waste elemental. I'm not trying to suggest Melnick was particularly intrigued by technology. Maybe he was, or had to be, vis-a-vis math. Any colleagues present are welcome to elucidate. I always think of what Marshall McLuhan says. Artists are our antennae, disjunctions that characterize much language writing, get at present tech. Years ago, over Bruce Andrews' work anticipating spam, I wrote for a symposium. Such ambiguously aggregated texts seem to corroborate Andrews' anticipatory interpolative texts from the 70s onward. Syntactically inhuman and stochastically filthy, they relate with relentless self-propagation, those hieroglyphs favoring images' valorous surface, as Andrews writes in Lip Service, distending across Bruce's vast over... hold on to this slide. I'm sorry, Sid. Putting on a slideshow like this, it takes a little bit of timing that I'm not used to. So I apologize and thank you for your patience on this front. So this is N.H. Pritchard, in whose work, in this piece in particular, words shatter, their components coalesce toward a strange, liberatory music and reveal themselves as matrices of sound, appearance, and meaning. More on that soon. Or Maggie O'Sullivan. Disjunction and obscurity of this sort, when placed in the context of the internet, takes on an insidiously economic function. For what is the purpose of so much spam but to drive ad revenue or evade search engines so as to push product? We all know AI is basically just meant to harvest info for tech conglomerates and so on. Again, the overlaps I'm mapping here err on the side of the aesthetic and technical. Again, forgive me, David, from Greek technikos, of or pertaining to art, experienced in art, made by art. In Melnick's writing, particularly Picoet and Men in Aida, though seemingly traced out in eclogues as well, there is a specifically premonitory means of reading these works that catches me. Prototypes of the way AI visually renders and mangles graphemes. I'm referring here specifically to visual AI generators and models. Obviously, ChatGPT's legible or too legible language, by contrast, actually requires far greater specialization to produce anything as distorted and fucked up as the appearance of type that I've shown earlier, which resembles something more like asemic writing or gulp visual poetry, which is usually pretty corny, at best. ChatGPT feels like real suds in a fake wash, whereas visual AI just feels like the wash. What Matteo Pasquinelli terms algorithmic apophenia, or, quote, the illusory consolidation of correlations or causal relations that do not exist in the material world, but only in the mind of AI, unquote, is useful here. Okay, so we can't get slender, small, cereal, fingers and teeth, right? They multiply. Phoenician script lossy. Slender fingers, slender teeth, shadows missing. Pocket. This was one from when I tried Picoet. The thin, vet, the oth, is ve uns, in inner, fact, diffling, the tele is love, thrik elaton, it, if te you tiff, Olfthal, I lay Libaber Bep be. There eout hies throwing avec on Beccali. More from Matteo Pasquale, quote, apophenia is the experience of seeing patterns or connections in random or meaningless data in the most diverse contexts, also in gambling and paranormal phenomena. When religious pictures are recognized in everyday's objects or a humanoid face on the surface of Mars, algorithmic governance is apathenic too. A paranoid recognition and arbitrary construction of political patterns on a global scale. There is an excessive belief, indeed, in the almighty power of algorithms, in their efficiency, and in the total transparency of the metadata society. The embryonic eye of the algorithmic vision, is growing with difficulties." Unquote. Connection between these creations and Melnick's work necessitates a question of tension between hallucination and code. I don't intend a direct opposition here. Rather, one might render uninterpretable code as a hallucination of language. If you can't read the code, ignorance recoils. One might enjoy the obscurity. For Hannah Weiner, code is a universalizing gesture. From her trans-space communication, quote, "I am interested in exploring methods of communication that will be understood face-to-face or at any distance, regardless of language, country, or planet, or origin, by all sending and receiving," unquote. In the same piece, she writes on the nonlinearity of code. "I consider this code an exploration of linear communication, which has served the binary neurological function of the brain. The most useful thing for me here in the code is the understanding of the equivalence. One kind of signal may equally be substituted for another with the exact same meaning. It then becomes very clear when a different, nonlinear thinking appears, as in Knight's thinking, schizophrenic thinking. Here, as in the chess game, the move is two up in a linear fashion, but then one jump to the side, to a conclusion or a connection that may baffle the listener if he is expecting a linear causal relationship. Lately, my own explorations have dealt with the use of minimal clues, how much information can be received, and how accurately, through how little means," unquote. David Melnick makes it evident he intended Picoet to function along the lines of the private language he collaboratively developed during childhood. Picoet does legendarily have an exact or correct pronunciation key, but what this is, we'll likely never know. So we are left with intimations of words, suggestions spilling over into possibly unintentional pun and novel hybridity. But Weiner also helps us to see how these inventions foster nonlinear thought, unexpected outcomes far from where a reader begins. I'd like to suggest, however, that there's a certain universality in obscurity, which is to say that hallucinatory apprehension is a sensation we all share, however shadowy or indiscernible. This sense of hallucination plays quite differently in Men in Aida, which is, arguably, an oral hallucination of the Iliad. It's prudent here to reference Louis Zukofsky's formula and recalibration of Pound, which Ben mentioned earlier, of poetry's play between sight, sound, and intellection. Sound, in Men in Aida, is where Melnick gathers. From Book 2 of Men in Aida, quote, "A toy, a goose, a punk cat, a raise. It is a toy," said a nasty Nestor, "whose rap you'll lie. You, an axe cinema, toe in toes, horse fin, you prone neon nag, pseudo-scan, fie, men, guy knows fizz, time made him all alone. Noon didn't nose me Gary's toes, a guy on you get I yea nigh," unquote. Meninaida distortion toward specified label, a pseudo-scan of the original Greek, an auditory phantasm, a perversely celebratory mirage. Again, Pasquinelli, quote, "Some parts of the human body are very easy to simplify in a geometric form. There is an algorithm, for instance, designed to detect literally assholes, which are geometrically very simple, as you can imagine. Of course, the geometry of porn is complex, and many offensive pictures manage to skip the filter. In general, what algorithms are doing here is to normalize the abnormal in a mathematical way." Specifying image generation against text gen, which, in my own experiments, cannot induce the same, or sometimes any, noise. From Catherine Malibu, quote, "In Greek philosophy, intelligibility always had the upper hand over intelligence. The intelligence of the intelligible, theoria, implies being present to the idea as one might watch a spectacle, without intervening or acting, without, moreover, establishing any competition among spectators. As for modern-day instances of the concept of understanding, they too retain this same neutrality with regard to individual variation." Sound out intelligible bacchanal? Unfortunately, mostly aesthetic observation here proceeds. Production, capture, formatting, labeling, how the models go about it. No trace of brain, i.e., brain eclogues, the tentative title of eclogues. A brain opens to itself, to the world where, per Robbie Martin on Media Roots Radio, the bot can only scream at itself. I must later look into neurology and cognition of speech versus the written word. What iota of us processes phonemes, graphemes, orthography against sound. Puns are at the root of language, but let's talk about that later. At the bar or wherever we're going after this. From Black Sun Graphic David Melnick piece. All endless meaner, Virgel uns fin tride sis terroabra, and Leitslein abright rilvante, the shearbers, foul use two. Dede, the toll malate, Wildstreib Sai, the lace tiwis, thela sato ally, she's a sloth 13 retora, ire lem, that orit mirthis. One last pair of consonances. I think of the movement of thought, which is cliche and it drives me crazy in blurbs and so forth. What can you do? Of the eclogues, then abstracted through Picoet and Meninaida, and I'm reminded of Stein's stanzas in meditation, which always feel palimpsestic to me, thought tumbling back on itself, the same poem written over and over, almost like Picoet's language as words enfolded, made private, yet discernible through sheer rhythm. More contemporaneously, I'm struck by Emily Martin's work, which, while not an immediate aesthetic relative of Melnick, holds for me a similar movement, maybe even ethos. This, from Colin Lee Marshall's interview with Martin, feels to me resonant with a work like A Pin's Feet. This is Emily Martin. Quote, I always have a Word doc open on my computer that I write everything into, work on poems, thinking through ideas and feelings, copy bits of reading, to-do lists, etc. And I've always thought of the documents as accumulated sediment. I worked chronologically and just let the resonances and thought processes reveal themselves to me in what writing I'd accumulated. Unquote. Perhaps as interesting to me in the sedimentation that could be said to mark Melnick's Ove is its stoppage. Certainly sedimentation continues. When I met with him, he was clearly an avid newsreader, was still watching movies and so on, but he turned away from his own work. Had to turn? Malibu, by way of Bergson, says, quote, characterized by exteriority and distance, intelligence does nothing but look straight ahead, solidifying and stabilizing everything it touches. Then, when it starts to take itself as object, intelligence petrifies itself. The biological and symbolic fail to understand each other. Unquote. Plus this, quote, intelligence is a gradual construction of what appears not to be constructed, namely the logical structure of judgment, even though it precedes all experience. Although it is already given, this structure must still unfold. Unquote. What unfolds in Melnick's work? Amoeba strip connecting intimacy and play, experimental cadence, data plus algorithm plus model, tripartite, a pin's fee, no model left. Regenerate until love can't for you anymore. Vint Vortjov being festos, ifs, the thing I use the best, I fjog ist sect, and ye I, it's morning is her a silvor, it you beth ik shun, ilf one trinesting, if ear cree, not at a lobel pie is dweenet, chess is ba ear shank, kelling is re in the Kevin sniv, ticks a singet, it nikonet, yo is poctize at puyogoyebsing, pob rank op, this got a hot, be pack pile, it's sostnetten upon thine pat. So strewn, I apologize. AI will be so different and probably more insidious a year from now. Different locus, puttering around like centipedes, ethical shifts constant and demeaning. For all its exactitude, compactness, and definition, I find myself ever warped by your work, David. Here's vestiges of a code untranslatable save for in the flux of thought. Sapphic remains, privileging intelligibility before intelligence, queerness before logic, queerness with logic. Proust from Contresant Bouffe, by way of Malibu. Every day I see more clearly that if the writer is to repossess himself of some part of his impressions, get to something personal, that is, and to the only material of art, he must put it, intelligence, aside. What intelligence restores to us under the name of the past is not the past, which evokes for me the morning, the finality of a pin's fee. Rest well, David. Happy belated Valentine's Day and happy early birthday.
Thank you so much, Ben, Jo, Gordon. There's a lot of, am I using English now? Am I using, what is this language? We had discussed doing a brief Q&A. I'm noting the time. So I just want to ask if there's like one or two questions, if I could get our presenters up. There's a lot to think through, a lot to think about. Does anyone have a question? I have one question if nobody has a question. I'm going to ask my question, which is for Ben, which is really about what it means to have this work in print in this edition and the process of kind of holding this work and seeing it in different editions.
What's the question?
The process of what does it mean to have this work reprinted today, and the process of kind of curating that work into this moment, into this new edition. I know you've held this work for so long.
Yeah. I mean, the origin of this book is that when I saw the notebook where David had been doing the initial scribble of Men and Aida, and I knew by this time that he destroyed things, I just decided not to give it back. I asked if I could borrow it, and I kept it. But then I felt really guilty for stealing this from David. So I decided I would mail it to Ron Silliman, David's oldest friend in poetry, and thought, well, it'll survive in Ron's archive, and that way it'll have been a selfless act on my part of having stolen it. So I mailed it to Ron. I never heard anything from him. And a couple years later, I saw him, or no, I wrote to him, and I said, oh, by the way, what did you think of the notebook? And he said, what notebook? Was lost in the mail. And so Ron and I talked on the phone, and we decided on that spot to form the David Melnick Mutual Appreciation Society. And our goal was to see David's poetry collected in a single book. And that was a long time ago. That's like 2010, I think, 2008. But I do think that this book comes out of, first and foremost, Ron's friendship for David. And I wanted to suggest a little bit of David's humility in the way in which he sometimes suppressed, if not destroyed, his work. Ron has been a champion of that work from the time that they met in Berkeley at the end of the 60s. And my affection for David, when I was living here in the Bay Area and a younger poet in a scene when it was mostly the older poets, David was just, I had felt at that time that the two most erudite poets that were at most of the readings were David Melnick and Beverly Dahlen, who were also two of the more self-effacing poets. And I just always admired David and felt grateful to have spent time with him. So to me, it's really, the book comes out of that affection and an affection for the work, which certainly deserves to have a long future shared by new readers.
Okay, thanks everyone for coming. That was a beautiful, beautiful answer. We have books in the back. There's some pirate prints. There's Gordon's interview and an early Melnick poem. Have a drink, hang out, talk to our presenters, ask your questions there. And we'll see you very soon. We got Carrie Edwards next week. That's 23rd at the lab. Thanks.